The email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, a digital harbinger of a storm I hadn't seen coming. The sender was my Aunt Carol, and the subject line, punctuated with a cloying exclamation point, read, "Jessica's baby shower contribution." I opened it, and my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a request. It was a formal invoice for $2,750. The PDF, designed with a flourish of pastel baby blocks, listed my name alongside the line item, "Mandated Family Contribution." A follow-up paragraph from my aunt elaborated on the importance of family contributions to significant life events, her words a masterclass in passive aggression. The irony was a physical blow, so staggering and deeply wounding it felt like the air had been punched from my lungs. Just 6 months ago, every single one of them, my parents, Aunt Carol, my uncle, and Jessica herself, had unanimously bailed on my wedding to my partner Mark. Their excuse had been a flimsy, last-minute family emergency, a vague and transparent lie that I had swallowed down with the bitter taste of my own tears on what should have been the happiest day of my life. This invoice wasn't just a demand for money. It was a declaration, a blatant and exquisitely painful symbol of my lifelong status as the family's resident afterthought, the one whose milestones were optional. The raw, unhealed wound of their abandonment was torn wide open, but this time, the familiar agony was being cauterized by something new. The hurt was crystallizing, hardening into a cold, simmering rage that felt less like pain and more like power. Before continuing the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers to be able to bring you stories like this every day. For you, it's just a click, but for me, it means a lot. The invoice was more than just a demand for money. It was a catalyst, a single sharp pressure point that fractured the dam holding back a lifetime of slights. A flood of painful memories, the defining moments of my existence within the family, came rushing back, not as a hazy montage, but with the searing clarity of freshly opened wounds. I was suddenly a child again, standing in the doorway of the living room, my straight-A report card clutched in my hand, waiting for the praise that never came beyond a cursory, "That's nice, dear." On the wall behind my father's head, another of Jessica's clumsy, abstract paintings had been hung in a brand-new ornate frame, a testament to the family's unwavering devotion to her blossoming talent. My passion for coding and technology, the intricate worlds I built on a screen, the complex problems I solved with lines of logical poetry, was always dismissed as a nerdy hobby, something I did alone in my room. It was never celebrated, never understood, and certainly never deemed worthy of the breathless dinner-table conversations that dissected every nuance of Jessica's artistic temperament. She was the golden child, the sensitive soul whose every whim and creative impulse was a matter of family importance, while I was the reliable, practical daughter whose achievements were as predictable and therefore as uninteresting as the sunrise. The memories stacked up, each one a brick in the wall that had been built between us. I was 14 when I won the district science fair with a robotics project I had poured 6 months of my life into, a complex robotic arm that could replicate human handwriting. I remember the thrill of my name being called, the weight of the first-place medal around my neck, and the desperate hope that this, finally, would be an achievement they couldn't ignore. I called them from the payphone in the school lobby, my voice trembling with excitement, only to be told they couldn't make it to the award ceremony that evening. It was, of course, the opening night of Jessica's high school play, in which she had a non-speaking role as a tree. There was no hesitation in their voices, no sense of conflict. Her silent presence on a stage was simply, inarguably, more important than my tangible, award-winning accomplishment. I stood there alone, under the fluorescent lights of the gymnasium, watching other families embrace their children, the hollow space where my own family should have been a cold, aching void. Holidays were a masterclass in this quiet cruelty. At Thanksgiving, when my uncle would inevitably ask what was new, I'd mention the prestigious academic scholarship I'd earned for college, a full ride that would save my parents a fortune. It would be met with polite, sterile nods and a brief, "Well, that's practical." Then the conversation would pivot, magnetically, to Jessica, who had recently decided she was entering her blue period, and the family would spend the next half hour earnestly debating the psychological implications, their brows furrowed with concern for her delicate creative spirit. This was the deep-rooted, systemic pattern of dismissal that had shaped me. It wasn't overt cruelty, it was a quiet, constant erosion of my worth. They had cast me in the role of the self-sufficient one, the one who didn't need their attention or support, and they had played their parts to perfection. The invoice was just the final scene in a long, tragic play, the ultimate confirmation that my only value in their eyes was as a supporting character in the grand drama of Jessica's life. Of all the memories that invoice dredged up, the wedding day was the most vivid, a wound that had never properly scabbed over. The year leading up to it had been a whirlwind of joyful planning, a meticulous and loving construction of the perfect day. Mark and I had chosen every detail with care, from the historic inn with its sprawling gardens to the string quartet that would play as I walked down the aisle. I had poured my heart into it, not just out of love for Mark, but out of a desperate, deeply buried hope that this event, this undeniable milestone of adult life, would finally solidify my place in my own family. I imagined them seeing me, truly seeing me, as a woman with a life and a love of her own, a permanent and valued part of the family tapestry. I had their names printed on elegant place cards, ready to be set at the head table, a physical symbol of the space I was holding for them in my heart and in my future. The morning began with sunlight streaming through the bridal suite window, a perfect, cloudless sky. Then the phone rang. It was Aunt Carol, her voice strained with a false sympathy. A sudden family matter had arisen, she explained vaguely, something that required all of their attention. An hour later, my father called, his voice uncomfortably gruff, echoing the same flimsy, suspiciously similar excuse. The cold, heavy dread that settled in the pit of my stomach was a premonition of the final, crushing blow. That call came from my mother. There was no anguish in her voice, no heartbreak for her only daughter. There was just a flat, dismissive, almost casual tone, as if she were canceling a dentist appointment. "Oh, Sarah," she'd sighed, "this family thing is just a mess. We're not going to be able to make it." No real explanation, no heartfelt apology, just a simple, devastating erasure of my most important day. I stood there in my ivory lace gown, the phone still pressed to my ear long after she'd hung up, and felt something inside me shatter. Mark found me minutes later, my makeup a mess of black tears, and held me together with the sheer force of his love. We went through the motions. We walked down the aisle, the scent of lilies and eucalyptus filling the air. We stood before our friends, our true family, and said our vows. But every time I looked out at the guests, my eyes were drawn to the front row, to the sea of empty chairs that gaped at us like open wounds. They were a silent, screaming testament to my family's choice. We smiled for the photos, we cut the cake, we had our first dance, but a shadow of profound abandonment tainted every moment of joy. The truth came a week later, a final cruel twist of the knife, delivered via the oblivious glow of a social media post. A distant cousin had posted a photo album titled, "Spontaneous Wine Weekend." There they were, my mother, my father, Aunt Carol, my uncle, and Jessica, all of them laughing, their faces flushed with sun and Sauvignon Blanc, glasses raised in a toast. The date stamp on the photos confirmed the unthinkable. Their sudden family emergency was a wine-tasting festival. They hadn't been dealing with a crisis. They had been on a leisurely, trivial vacation. They had looked at the two invitations before them, the meticulously planned once-in-a-lifetime celebration of their daughter's love, and a spontaneous weekend of sipping Chardonnay, and they had chosen the wine. The fresh pain of the invoice, layered over the resurrected agony of the wedding, created a volatile, chemical reaction inside me. The years of quiet acceptance, of swallowing my hurt to keep the peace, evaporated in a flash of white-hot clarity. I would not be silent this time. My fingers, steady and deliberate, dialed Aunt Carol's number. She answered on the second ring, her voice oozing a saccharine sweetness that set my teeth on edge. Before I could even state my purpose, she launched into a preemptive tirade, a masterclass in manipulation and gaslighting. It was a monologue about the sanctity of family duty, the profound importance of selflessness when celebrating a new life, a new branch on the family tree. She spoke of how, in times like these, we all had to pull together, and she was so glad I understood my role. The implication was clear. I was a cog in the family machine, and my function was to contribute financially. When she finally paused for a breath, I spoke, my voice low and devoid of the emotion that was churning in my gut. "You sent me an invoice for $2,750, I stated, letting the number hang in the air. "After you, my parents, and my own cousins skipped my wedding." The silence on the other end was brief, but I could feel her regrouping, shifting her tactics. The sweetness curdled into condescension. "Oh, Sarah, you're not still dwelling on that, are you?" she clucked. "That was a completely different situation. We had a family matter to attend to." When I reminded her that their family matter was a wine festival, her voice hardened. "A wedding is a party, a choice. A new baby is a commitment, a future. Honestly, your priorities seem to be skewed if you can't see the difference." It was the ultimate dismissal, a casual demotion of the most significant day of my life to a trivial social gathering. She was telling me, in no uncertain terms, that my marriage was a lesser event than Jessica's pregnancy. That was the moment the last thread of hope I'd clung to for their approval finally snapped. I felt a cold calm settle over me as she delivered her final, thinly veiled threat. "This is your chance to show you're part of this family, Sarah. If you choose not to contribute, don't be surprised when you find yourself on the outside. We won't have room for people who are so ungrateful and selfish." The words were meant to sting, to trigger my lifelong fear of being cast out. And they did sting, but not in the way she intended. They weren't a threat. They were a clarification. The call was infuriating, a perfect encapsulation of their toxic dynamic, but it was also a gift. It solidified my resolve in a way nothing else could have. As I ended the call, the old familiar pattern of absorbing the hurt, of questioning my own feelings, of wondering how I could win back their favor, was gone. It was replaced by a quiet, unshakable certainty. The line in the sand had been drawn, not by her threat, but by my decision. My quest for their approval was, officially, irrevocably, over. I hung up the phone, but the conversation wasn't over. It was a vicious echo in the sudden silence of my office, a toxic cocktail of rage and sorrow churning in my gut. My aunt's words replayed on a venomous loop. "A completely different situation. Your priorities seem to be skewed, ungrateful and selfish." Each phrase was a fresh jab at a bruise that was decades old, the kind of deep internal ache that never fully heals. The sheer breathtaking injustice of it all threatened to swallow me whole. My hands were shaking, not with fear, but with a raw, primal anger that felt like it could power a city. This wasn't just about an invoice or a missed party. It was about the science fair trophy I accepted alone in a cavernous gymnasium. It was about the straight-A report cards that earned a distracted pat on the head. It was about the sea of empty chairs at my wedding, a stark and public monument to my own insignificance. It was about a lifetime spent dutifully and quietly orbiting a sun that was never, ever meant to shine on me. The frustration was a physical presence, a tightening in my chest, a scream lodged in my throat. I paced the room, a caged animal of my own making, trapped for years in the same old cycle of performing, pleading, hurting, and forgiving. And then, as the emotional tempest reached its zenith, as the waves of fury and grief crashed against the shores of my consciousness, something inside me didn't break. It settled. The hurricane in my chest didn't vanish. It contracted, collapsing in on itself until it became a single, dense point of energy. The muddy waters of my lifelong confusion began to clear, revealing the bedrock truth with an unfamiliar and empowering calm. For the very first time, I saw the entire dynamic with absolute, diamond-hard clarity. I had spent 32 years on a fool's errand. I had been running a race with no finish line, performing for an audience that had never once bothered to look up at the stage. I was begging for scraps of validation from a family whose table was intentionally, purposefully bare when it came to me. Their approval wasn't something I could earn with better grades, a bigger accomplishment, or a more perfect wedding. It was never on offer. The rules of their game were designed to ensure I could never win, because my designated role was to keep trying, to keep feeding their collective ego with my quiet desperation. The profound, soul-shaking realization was that I had been the one giving them all the power. The desire to win their love, a gnawing ache that had defined so much of my life, was suddenly gone, cauterized by the white-hot heat of this new understanding. In its place grew a steely determination, a quiet, cold resolve that was more powerful than any outburst of anger. This was no longer about them. It wasn't about changing their minds or making them see my worth. It was about me, finally and fully, claiming it for myself. This was no longer a plea for love. It was a declaration of my own value, written in a language they would have no choice but to understand. That evening, the quiet hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in our apartment, a stark contrast to the storm still raging within me. When Mark came home, he found me sitting at the kitchen island, the glow of my laptop screen illuminating the invoice from Aunt Carol. He took one look at my face, a carefully constructed mask of calm that he could see right through, and immediately knew something was wrong. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I laid out the entire situation for him with the cold precision of a software engineer detailing a system failure. I showed him the invoice, the pastel baby blocks mocking me from the screen. I recounted the phone call with my aunt, quoting her dismissive words verbatim. A completely different situation. Your priorities seem to be skewed, ungrateful, and selfish. As I spoke, a dark flush crept up Mark's neck, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by a protective fury that was a soothing balm to my wounded spirit. He read and reread the email, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the counter. "This isn't just an invoice, Sarah," he said, his voice a low growl. "This is a bill for a lifetime of their neglect. It's a tax for not being Jessica." His anger, so pure and righteous on my behalf, was the validation I had craved from my family for 32 years. He was my rock, my true family. And in his eyes, I saw my own worth reflected back at me, untarnished and absolute. His unwavering support gave me the final push I needed. "Let's just delete it," he said finally, his voice softening as he pulled me into a hug. "Block her number. Block all of them. We'll be done with it. We don't need them." A year ago, a month ago, even that morning, I would have agreed. Cutting them off would have felt like the only solution, but something had fundamentally shifted within me. "No," I said, and the word felt solid, like a stone in my hand. "That's what they expect me to do. I can either pay it and swallow the humiliation, or I can disappear. Both options let them win. Both options let them continue their narrative that I'm the difficult one, the selfish one who just drifted away." I pulled back, looking at him, the gears in my mind turning, a new kind of logic taking hold. Ignoring this is a passive move. It's an admission of defeat. I'm done being passive. I stared at the invoice on the screen, at its neat columns and its bold, final number. They had tried to quantify my family obligation. They had communicated with me in the language of transactions, of costs and contributions. And as a software engineer, as a person who builds systems and analyzes data for a living, I realized with a sudden, startling clarity that this was a language I spoke far better than they did. An idea began to form, not born of emotion, but of cold, clear strategy. I need to do something they can't ignore, I said, a new energy in my voice. Something that speaks their language. Simply cutting them off is an emotional response. I need to give them a data-driven one. A slow smile spread across Mark's face as he saw the shift in my eyes. "What are you thinking?" he asked. I turned back to the laptop. "They sent me an invoice," I said, my fingers already hovering over the keyboard. "So I'm going to send one back. I'm not going to write an angry email filled with my feelings. I'm going to craft a response that will force them to confront the true, quantifiable cost of their neglect. I'm going to give them a balance sheet of our relationship, and it's going to be a debt they can never repay." My professional life as a software engineer had trained me to approach chaos with logic, to find the bugs in a broken system, and to build elegant solutions from a mess of tangled code. I had honed my skills in research and data analysis, and now I was going to apply that same methodical approach to the dysfunctional system of my own family. The project was codenamed Operation Baby Shower, and my objective was to gather incontrovertible data. My anger was no longer a hot, blinding rage. It had cooled into a focused energy, the hum of a high-performance server processing a complex query. I started my digital reconnaissance where all modern family dramas fester, social media. It didn't take long. A single gushing post from a distant cousin led me to the event's online invitation, and the first piece of damning evidence fell into place. The venue. It wasn't a church basement or a backyard. It was the Silver Orchid Conservatory, an opulent glass-walled botanical garden known for its five-figure booking fees and months-long waiting list. I navigated to their website, the curated photos of sun-drenched, impossibly chic events, a stark contrast to the growing darkness in my heart. Their listed packages confirmed my suspicions. The sheer cost of renting the space for an afternoon was more than the price of a half-dozen round-trip flights from their city to mine. From there, the data points began to connect. The invitation's comment section was a treasure trove of vendor tags. I discovered they had hired Eleanor Vance Events, a high-end event planner whose portfolio was a testament to extravagant taste and unlimited budgets. The catering was being handled by Artisan Plates, a company that specialized in curated culinary experiences, which I knew was code for food that cost more per plate than my entire wedding bouquet. With each click, a clearer picture emerged, a detailed financial blueprint of an event designed to be a spectacle. The final and most galling discovery was Jessica's public baby registry. It was a monument to consumerism, a digital shrine to my family's distorted sense of value. I scrolled through the list, my jaw tightening with every absurdly expensive item. A $2,200 smart bassinet that promised to rock the baby with AI-driven precision. A designer Italian stroller that cost more than my first car. A sterling silver rattle from a luxury jewelry store. A wardrobe of organic cashmere onesies, each one priced at a three-digit figure. It was an endless parade of status symbols masquerading as baby necessities. The sheer, breathtaking scale of it all, contrasted with their complete and utter disregard for my wedding, was a physical blow. They couldn't be bothered to board a 2-hour flight to witness my marriage vows, but they were more than willing to collectively fund a $2,200 piece of robotic furniture for a baby who wasn't even born yet. I methodically took screenshots of everything: the venue's pricing page, the event planner's Instagram, the entire ludicrous registry. Each image was a piece of evidence, a verifiable detail that would form the backbone of my response. Every discovery fueled my resolve, transforming my plan from a simple, reactive email into a proactive, evidence-based strike for justice. This was no longer about my hurt feelings. This was about presenting a case so airtight, so irrefutable, that even they, in their willful blindness, would be forced to see the truth. With a digital folder overflowing with screenshots and links, my ammunition, I began to construct my reply. This wasn't going to be a hastily typed email, a torrent of raw emotion that they could easily dismiss as a hysterical outburst. No, this would be a meticulously crafted document, a masterpiece of cold corporate precision. It would be my masterpiece, a final project in a course of study I hadn't realized I'd been taking for 32 years. I opened a design program and created a new document, a professional-looking invoice template that mirrored the pastel block-adorned one my aunt had sent me. The company name at the top was not a business, but a statement. S. Davis, Independent Entity. The Bill To section listed every one of them by name: my parents, my aunt and uncle, and my cousin Jessica. The invoice number was a string of digits representing my wedding date. The due date was marked immediately. But it was in the line items where my years of suppressed rage were finally, beautifully, and logically quantified. The first line was not for a baby shower contribution. It was for reimbursement for services and contributions unacknowledged. The description was concise: a lifetime of expected emotional support, academic achievements used for family bragging rights, and consistent, one-way familial obligation. The amount was listed as incalculable. The next line item was more concrete: partial reimbursement for wedding event, 10/15/2024. Family discount applied. Underneath, I listed a calculated portion of the venue cost, the catering for the 5 empty seats at the head table, and the non-refundable deposits that had been based on their attendance. I calculated the average cost of a round-trip plane ticket from their city to mine, multiplied it by 5, and listed it as travel expenses forfeited. But the line item that gave me the most satisfaction was the final one: consultation fee, emotional labor and data analysis in a dysfunctional family system. I priced it at an aggressive hourly rate, multiplying it by the hours I had spent in the last week alone, gathering evidence and processing the trauma of their latest demand. The subtotal was a staggering figure, a number that made their petty $2,750 look like pocket change. But I wasn't finished. The final and most significant part of my plan was the attachment. I navigated to my corporate compensation portal and downloaded the statement for my last quarterly performance bonus. It was a significant figure, the result of a grueling but successful project I had led at my tech company, a tangible reward for the skills and dedication they had always dismissed as a nerdy hobby. I opened a photo editor and carefully redacted my personal account information, but left the company name, my name, and the final glorious number in bold black ink. It was a figure that didn't just dwarf the baby shower invoice, it obliterated it. It was a number that screamed of a success they had never bothered to acknowledge, a level of professional achievement they couldn't possibly comprehend. I saved the redacted document as a PDF, its file name a simple, devastating statement: proof of value. This invoice wasn't a plea to be paid back. It was a demonstration. It was a cold, hard, data-driven rebuttal to their entire narrative about me. It was my resignation from the role they had cast me in, and my application for a new one, a woman whose worth was not up for their negotiation. With Mark's hand resting on my shoulder, a silent, steady anchor in the storm I was about to unleash, I drafted the email that would serve as my declaration of independence. There would be no hint of the tears I'd shed, no echo of the rage that had fueled me. The tone was not emotional. It was the cool, professional, and utterly devastating language of a corporate restructuring. The subject line was a simple, sterile reply to my aunt's original message. Jessica's baby shower contribution. I addressed it to all of them: my parents, my aunt, my uncle, and Jessica, ensuring no one could later claim ignorance. The opening was disarmingly polite. Dear family, it began. Thank you for the invoice for $2,650 received yesterday. I am writing to formally decline this charge and to close out our outstanding accounts. From there, the politeness ended, replaced by a systematic, evidence-based dismantling of our entire relationship. I laid out the history of their neglect with the dispassionate precision of a legal brief, citing specific, irrefutable examples. I referenced the district science fair of my freshman year, noting the date and the conflicting, non-essential event they chose to attend instead. I mentioned the academic scholarships that were met with polite indifference, while Jessica's artistic phases were treated as matters of grave family importance. I detailed the ultimate betrayal of my wedding day, including the date, the time of their suspiciously coordinated cancellation calls, and the name of the wine tasting festival they attended, a fact I stated without accusation, as a simple, verifiable data point. Each sentence was a carefully placed brick, building an unassailable wall of truth. I then moved to the financial portion of my response. In the spirit of settling all family-related debts, I wrote, I have attached an invoice of my own for your review. It details a number of uncompensated services and financial discrepancies from over the years. I consider this a more accurate reflection of our family's balance sheet. I attached the meticulously crafted invoice, the PDF, a silent testament to the true cost of their emotional neglect. Then, the final blow. Furthermore, I continued, I understand that my financial contribution is a matter of great importance to you. To that end, I have also attached a redacted copy of a recent professional bonus. I offer this not as a boast, but as a point of data to clarify that my refusal to pay is not a matter of financial inability, but a conscious, value-based decision. The final paragraph was my new terms of engagement, a clear and unwavering statement of my new reality. Moving forward, I wrote, I am no longer seeking your approval or validation. Any future relationship we may have will be on my terms, based on a foundation of mutual respect and reciprocity. The dynamic of the past is hereby dissolved. I read it over one last time, my heart hammering against my ribs, but my hands were steady. Mark squeezed my shoulder. Ready? He asked. I took a deep breath, a final exhalation of a lifetime of subservience, and my finger moved to the trackpad. I clicked send. In the sterile quiet of our apartment, the soft whoosh of the outgoing email was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of chains breaking. It was the sound of a door slamming shut on the past. It was the sound of my own unadulterated freedom. It didn't take an hour. It took less than 5 minutes. The digital silence that followed my email was shattered by the frantic buzzing of my phone on the kitchen island. It was a declaration of war, answered with an immediate, full-scale assault. My screen lit up with a barrage of notifications, a chaotic symphony of outrage and disbelief. First came the texts from my mother, a series of short, sharp bursts of fury in all caps. What have you done? Followed by, you are deeply cruel and ungrateful. And finally, you have lost your mind. Then came the voicemails. I listened to the first few seconds of my Aunt Carol's, her voice a high-pitched, shrieking torrent of disbelief and fury. How could you do this to us? To Jessica? After everything we've done for you? This is unhinged, Sarah! I deleted it without listening to the rest. My father's message was next, his usual blustering indignation amplified to an almost comical degree. It was less a cohesive statement and more a series of sputtering, indignant phrases. Unbelievable arrogance, throwing your money in our faces, a deeply materialistic and hurtful thing to do. A stark, impersonal pop-up then informed me. Sarah Davis was removed from family fun. I could only imagine the group chat, a raging inferno of digital vitriol, my name being dragged through the mud, my actions dissected and condemned. The phone went quiet for a moment, the sudden silence almost as deafening as the previous onslaught. I felt a wave of cold isolation wash over me, the predictable but still painful consequence of my rebellion. And then, amidst the wreckage, a single, quiet ping. It was a new text message, from a number I didn't immediately recognize. It was my younger cousin, Chloe, the one who always sat quietly at family gatherings, observing everything. The message was just 3 words, followed by a small emoji. "You go, girl." It was a single pinprick of light in the suffocating darkness. It wasn't a declaration of war or a passionate defense. It was a quiet, private acknowledgement from behind enemy lines. It was a tiny crack in the family's monolithic front, a sign that I was not entirely alone in my assessment of their toxic dynamics. It was the first, crucial piece of external data that suggested I wasn't, in fact, unhinged. I was just the first one to say it out loud. After the initial explosion of fury, a different kind of weapon was deployed, a deafening, strategic silence. For 3 days, my phone remained inert, a silent black rectangle on the counter. The absence of angry texts and voicemails was, in its own way, more unnerving than the barrage had been. It was a coordinated shunning, a silent confirmation that I had been successfully excommunicated. I was adrift, floating in a self-made void, and while a part of me felt the liberation I had sought, another, smaller part felt the cold, familiar pang of absolute isolation. So when my phone finally rang on the 4th day, my heart leaped into my throat. The name on the screen was not one I had expected. Uncle David, my father's younger brother. He was the quiet one in the family, an engineer like me, a man who generally observed the family theatrics from a safe, neutral distance. I braced myself for a calmer, more logical, but equally damning lecture. I was wrong. I answered, my voice attentive. "Hello?" His was low and steady, lacking any of the hysteria or indignation of the others. "Sarah, it's David. I saw the email." I waited, my guard still up. "Look," he sighed, and it was a sound heavy with a weariness that felt ancient. "I'll be honest with you. I was shocked. A tactical nuke is what it was, and I need you to hear this. I wasn't surprised by why you did it." The words hung in the air, and I felt the first crack in my armor of righteous anger. "We've never been fair to you, Sarah," he continued, his voice laced with a shame I had never heard from anyone in my family before. "Not once. We've all been so caught up in the Jessica show for as long as I can remember, and we just let you manage. We let you be the responsible one, the smart one, the one who didn't need anything from us. It was easier that way." He paused, and I could hear him take a deep breath. "I'm ashamed of it. I'm ashamed that I stood by and watched it happen all these years, even at your wedding. There was no family emergency, Sarah. We all know it. And I went along with it. For that, I am truly sorry." It was like a dam breaking inside me. The validation I had spent my entire life chasing, the simple acknowledgement of my reality, was being handed to me freely, without my having to fight for it. I couldn't speak, a knot of 32 years of unshed tears tightening in my throat. "I'm not making excuses for them," he said, his voice firm. "Your father is my brother and I love him, but he's blind. They all are. What you did, it might be the only thing that could ever make them see. I don't know if it will work, but I'd like to try and talk to them, to act as a mediator if you'd be open to it. No pressure, just an offer." It was the first time a member of my family had ever sided with me, had ever chosen my truth over their comfort. It was a quiet, unexpected olive branch extended into the wasteland of our relationship, and it was the most profoundly moving gesture I had ever received. 2 days after my conversation with Uncle David, my father called. The blustering indignation from his voicemail was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out, confused tone that I had never heard from him before. He sounded like a man who had lost his way, whose map of the world had suddenly been revealed as a fiction. He didn't start with an accusation, but with a wounded sigh. "Your mother is a wreck, Sarah," he said, his voice raspy. We just, we don't understand where all this anger is coming from. We've always tried to do what's best." I listened patiently, letting the silence hang in the air after he finished. The old me would have rushed to fill it, to soothe his confusion, to take responsibility for his feelings. The new me waited. "It's not just anger, Dad," I said finally, my voice calm and even, devoid of the emotion that had once ruled me. "It's 32 years of accumulated data. The invoice was just the final entry in the ledger." He seemed baffled by the term. "Data? What are you talking about? This is family, not one of your computer projects." This was his first faltering defense, an attempt to retreat to the familiar ground of dismissing my world. I didn't let him. "At the district science fair in 2006, you and Mom went to Jessica's play instead," I stated, not as an accusation, but as a fact. "When I got a full academic scholarship to college, we spent Thanksgiving dinner talking about Jessica's new pottery class. When I got married, you went to a wine festival. These aren't feelings, Dad. They are data points. They are actions that created a pattern, a system. My email was simply the analysis of that system." I could almost hear him struggling to process this, to fit it into his narrative. He was a man who operated on broad, undefined emotions and unspoken agreements. My logic was a foreign language to him. "And that bonus statement," he stammered, the shame in his voice palpable. "What was that for? To make us feel small? To throw your money in our faces?" "You sent me a bill," I replied, my voice still quiet, still firm. "You made our relationship about money. You placed a specific dollar value on my familial obligation." I simply responded with a more complete financial statement. "It wasn't about making you feel small. It was about making you see a reality you've consistently ignored." The line went quiet. It wasn't the angry, punishing silence of my mother or aunt. It was the empty, echoing silence of a man with no script. For the first time in his life, he was being forced to confront his own behavior without the buffer of family consensus, without my mother and my aunt there to form a chorus of agreement. He was alone with my words, and my words were backed by the undeniable truth of his own actions. When he finally spoke again, his voice was small, almost a mumble. Well, I suppose I didn't see it that way." He cleared his throat. "I'm sorry, if you were hurt." It was a clumsy, inadequate apology, the classic non-apology of a person not yet ready to take full ownership. He was sorry for my feelings, not for his actions. It wasn't enough. But as I stood there, staring out my window at the city skyline, I realized with a startling clarity that for the first time, it was a start. The conversation with my father left a strange and unsettling quiet in its wake. It was not the hostile, punishing silence of the first few days, but something more complex, the eerie calm at the eye of a hurricane. I had thrown a boulder into the placid, stagnant pond of our family, and now I could only wait and watch the ripples spread. I didn't have to wait long. My phone, which had become a barometer for the family's emotional climate, buzzed with a call from Uncle David. His voice was strained, but there was a new, resolute energy to it. "The schism is official," he said, without any preamble. "You didn't just throw a rock, Sarah. You blew up the dam." He went on to describe a family in a state of open civil war. My email, followed by his and my father's subsequent conversations, had acted as a detonator, sending shockwaves through the entire extended network of relatives. The once solid monolithic front had shattered, and factions were digging in their trenches. On one side were the hardliners, my Aunt Carol and my mother. According to David, they were apoplectic, doubling down on their narrative with the ferocity of a cornered animal. I was no longer just ungrateful or selfish. I was now malicious, calculating, and actively trying to destroy the family. They were working the phones, trying to poison the well, framing my data-driven email as a cold, cruel, and materialistic attack on the family.